They threw me out like I was nothing. At 19, I lost my home, my so-called family, and everything I had ever known, just to make space for my newborn half-sister. 6 years later, the same people who abandoned me came crawling back, begging for my help. But I wasn't the same person they had discarded. And this time, I had the power. Let me take you back to where it all began. I was born out of obligation, not love. My mother was only a teenager when she found out she was pregnant with me, and her strict, old-school family forced her to keep the baby, me. She hadn't even wanted to tell them. But my father, in his infinite lack of awareness, took it upon himself to break the news before she had a chance. He didn't even ask her. He just picked up the phone, called both sets of parents, and proudly announced that they were expecting a child. Did he think it was good news? A moment to celebrate? Maybe. But he didn't stop to consider what my mother wanted. It was the beginning of the end for them. Their relationship unraveled almost immediately. They had been together for a year, just two college kids navigating young love, when this moment changed everything. My mother was furious. She broke up with him right then and there, cutting him out as swiftly as possible. But there was one problem her family already knew. And once they knew, there was no way out. Abortion was not an option. Not for them. They made it clear, if she terminated the pregnancy, they would disown her. And so, she had no choice. She carried me to term, not out of love, not out of any maternal instinct, but because she was forced to. I know all of this because she has told me. Over and over again. She reminds me constantly how lucky I am to even be alive. If it had been up to her, she never would have had me. Imagine growing up hearing that from your own mother. Being told that your very existence was an accident, one she would have erased if she could. It wasn't just words. It was in the way she looked at me, the way she treated me. Like a lingering mistake she had to tolerate. She never let me forget that I was a burden. But my childhood wasn't just shaped by my mother's resentment. My father, the man who had so eagerly shared the news of my existence, turned out to be just as much of a disappointment, just in a different way. My mother hated me because she was stuck with me. She blamed me for everything, her lost opportunities, her career setbacks, the weight of responsibility she never wanted. And my father? He was sweet, sure. But sweetness doesn't pay bills. Sweetness doesn't make you reliable. And it certainly doesn't make you a good parent. Looking back now, I see the signs I missed as a child. The odd behavior. The way he spoke in circles. The haze in his eyes. I didn't realize it at the time, but he was definitely a pothead. He thought he was being funny, cracking bizarre jokes and acting like a friend rather than a father. But his version of fun was inconsistent and fleeting. He showed up for holidays, remembered my birthday, and made occasional efforts to be present. But beyond that, he was a mess. He could never hold down a job, and my mother never let me forget it. She would complain constantly about how he was a useless, incompetent man who couldn't even support himself, let alone a child. But despite all her complaints, I was still her problem. Her family had decided long before I was born that my father was incapable of raising me. And honestly, they weren't wrong. So, she was stuck with me. And I was stuck with her. For the first 10 years of my life, I lived with my mother full-time. My father was more of an occasional visitor than a real presence. Once I turned 10, though, I was allowed to stay with him on weekends. At first, I thought it was a win, a break from my mother's cold, bitter existence. But reality hit fast. His place was tiny, suffocating. The air always smelled off. And even as a kid, I could tell that he was struggling. He lived off a single meal a day, and suddenly he had to figure out how to feed a growing child. I knew I was a strain on him, even if he tried to make it seem like he was happy to have me. At my mother's house, I was unwanted but provided for. At my father's, I was welcome but uncomfortable. That was my childhood. A tug-of-war between two people who never really wanted me. Then, when I was 15, my mother met Jeffrey, my stepfather. Jeffrey was different. Not cruel. Not kind. Just indifferent. And honestly, that was a relief. He didn't acknowledge me, and I didn't acknowledge him. We coexisted in the same space without friction, without warmth. It was peaceful indifference. They dated for a couple of years, and then, when I was 17, they got married. And that's when everything changed. Immersed myself in the overwhelming reality of my situation. My mother had thrown me out like I was nothing. My father, barely coherent, stood in the middle of a house that looked like it had been abandoned for months. The smell of stale beer, cigarette smoke, and something even worse clung to the air. I clenched my fists, fighting back another wave of tears. I had already spent too much of my energy crying. I wasn't going to waste another drop on people who had never cared for me. Instead, I scanned the room, looking for a clean place to sit. There wasn't one. The couch was covered in food stains and crumpled lottery tickets. The floor? Scattered with empty bottles and discarded clothes. My dad, still smiling lazily, slumped down onto the couch, scratching his unshaven face. "Good to see you, kid," he mumbled, his voice thick and sluggish. I didn't respond. What was there to say? I had no home. No family to turn to. And now, my best option was a father who could barely function. I took a deep breath. This wasn't the end for me. I refused to let it be. If no one else was going to look out for me, I would do it myself. I couldn't take it anymore. The sight of him, slumped on that filthy couch, a joint burning between his fingers, made my blood boil. The room was thick with the stench of smoke, stale beer, and broken promises. Without thinking, I marched up to him and smacked the joint right out of his hand. Ash scattered onto the floor. He blinked at me, confused, slow, like he was trying to process what had just happened. But I wasn't here to play games. I needed him to listen. "You're going to step up," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "You're going to stop wasting your life and actually be a father to me." He chuckled, rubbing his fingers together as if debating whether to reach for the joint. He must have thought I was joking. That was the moment I lost it. Before I could stop myself, my hand shot out, and I slapped him across the face. Hard. The sharp crack of skin on skin echoed through the tiny, suffocating room. Regret hit me instantly, but I couldn't take it back. My chest heaved, my hands trembled, but I still meant every word. "I'm staying," I said, barely above a whisper. "Mom kicked me out. So now, it's your turn to do something right." For a moment, he just stared at me. Then, without a word, he got up and walked into the bedroom, slamming the door behind him. I sank onto the lumpy, stained couch, rubbing my face. What had I done? Sleep didn't come easy that night. The room was too quiet, yet my mind was screaming. But when morning came, it was him who approached me first. His eyes were clearer than they had been in a long time. He sat down, rubbed his face, and exhaled a long breath. "What the hell happened last night?" he asked. So I told him. Everything. How Mom had thrown me out like trash. How I had nowhere else to go. How I needed him to step up, to change, not just for me but for himself. He listened, silent, for the first time in forever. When I finished, he picked up his phone and called Mom. She didn't answer. He tried again. Nothing. He sat there, staring at the screen, his fingers twitching as if itching for a cigarette. Finally, he put the phone down. "That's it then," he muttered. "You stay." It wasn't some grand moment. There were no hugs, no reassurances. Just those two words. But for the first time, they felt like something real. Of course, nothing changed overnight. He promised to try, and I held on to that promise like a lifeline. But addiction doesn't just disappear. Over the next few years, he slipped. More times than I could count. And every time, I had to decide, stay and fight or walk away. I chose to stay. College wasn't an option. We had no money, and I refused to drown in debt. Instead, I worked. Found internships. Some paid decently, but not enough to build a future. I cleaned the house, made sure it didn't turn back into the wreck it once was. And he tried. He really did. He looked for jobs, but his past clung to him like a shadow. Employers didn't forget. The frustration weighed on both of us. I was making money, and he wasn't. That stung. It chipped away at him, bit by bit. But we had no choice. We had to survive together, whether we liked it or not. And then, 3 years ago, everything changed. At the time, he was barely scraping by as a store manager, while I worked as an accountant, a soul-crushing desk job with a slightly better paycheck. Then, out of nowhere, a lifeline appeared. A friend from middle school, Aggie, reached out. Her dad was expanding his business and needed reliable people. She thought of me. At first, I hesitated. Was this a handout? A pity offer? She assured me it wasn't. She had fought for me, convinced her father I was the right person for the job. She believed in me. The position, corporate liaison, was a massive step up. Better pay, longer hours, but a future. And she didn't stop there. She asked if my dad had experience in warehouse management. Turns out, he did. And just like that, he got an offer too. For the first time in forever, things looked up. It wasn't easy, but he made it work. He quit smoking. He stopped gambling. We moved into a decent home, a place that didn't smell like regret and wasted time. 2 years passed, and life, for once, felt stable. Then, out of nowhere, my phone rang. It was my mother. We hadn't spoken in years, but desperation dripped from her voice. She didn't ask how I was. Didn't apologize. She just said she needed my help. Turns out, she and Jeffrey had sunk everything into a failing business. They had ignored every red flag, thrown money into a black hole, and now they were drowning in debt. Selling everything. And still, it wasn't enough. She had heard I was doing well. Assumed I had money to spare. And now, she wanted me to save her. She didn't even say sorry. Just asked for a lifeline. Like I owed her something. I gripped the phone, my pulse roaring in my ears. What was I supposed to say? She wanted me to forget the past. To put aside the years of pain, the resentment, the scars she left behind. All because she needed help. Not for herself, but for her daughter, my half-sister. Her future was on the line, and suddenly, my mother expected kindness from me, the very person she had cast aside. Did she think I would just say yes? That I would leap at the chance to be her savior? After everything she put me through? The audacity of it all almost made me laugh. But instead, I decided to play along. Just for fun. Just to see how far she'd take this. On the phone, my voice was steady, agreeable. I told her I'd look into it, that I'd figure something out. But deep down, I had no intention of giving her a single cent. Not after the years of neglect, of cruelty. Not after she made it clear, over and over again, that I was nothing more than an inconvenience to her. So, I let her believe it. I kept the game going for days. Every call, every conversation, she poured out her financial struggles. She spoke as if we were close, as if there was ever a time when she treated me with love. I listened. I nodded. I let her think she was winning. But the truth? I was never going to help her. And I was waiting. Waiting for the one thing that might have made me hesitate. An apology. A real one. Some kind of recognition for the damage she had done. But it never came. Not once. And that made what I was about to do so much easier. Then, 2 days ago, she finally asked the question she had been dancing around. When will you send the money? I exhaled slowly, savoring the moment before I spoke. And then, I told her the truth. Never. I made it clear, every word sharp, deliberate. I told her she had been played, that I never had any intention of helping her. I reminded her of the years of suffering she put me through, the way she treated me like I was disposable. And she hadn't even had the decency to say sorry. Yet, she thought she could come to me, demand my help, expect my kindness. Foolish. She tried to speak, but I didn't let her. I hung up, cutting her off before she could muster a single word of protest. And then? I made sure the world knew. I put it all out there. The truth. Every painful detail. I exposed her, the woman who pretended to be so kind, so accomplished, so respectable. I wanted people to see what she really was. And I didn't hold back. I even included the part where she had the nerve to beg me for help just weeks before, acting like I owed her something. And you know what? I don't regret it. But my father? He thinks I went too far. That I should have just ignored her, let it go. That playing along was cruel. And maybe he's right. But cruelty was the point. She had been cruel to me my entire life. So why should I play the part of the noble, forgiving child? This isn't some fairy tale where I rise above and take the moral high ground. This is my life. And in my life, I get to do what I want. Still, my father kept pushing. He wanted me to apologize. To smooth things over. So, I decided to sit him down and have a real conversation. To make him remember. Because for most of my childhood, he wasn't exactly present. Lost in his own world, he barely noticed what was happening. And so, I reminded him. I made him see just how alone I had been, how badly she had treated me, how I had no one. Not even him. And something shifted. He understood. Maybe not fully, maybe not in the way I needed, but enough. Enough to stop telling me to apologize. Enough to realize that what I did, while not right, was something I needed. A release. A long overdue reckoning. As for my mother? Silence. It's been nearly a week since that call, and she hasn't reached out. But I know people are talking. My inbox is full of messages, questions about my post. But I have nothing more to say. I said what I needed to say. I moved on. And then, today, the silence broke. She reached out. Not to apologize, not to make amends. But to tell me how much she regretted trusting me. How she wished I had never been born. The feeling? Mutual. She told me that because of my post, she couldn't live in that town anymore. That the shame, the whispers, the judgment, it was all too much. And so, she was leaving. Moving away. And she blamed me for it. Said I got exactly what I wanted. Maybe she's right. But honestly, I don't care where she goes. I don't care what happens to her. We haven't been in each other's lives for years, and nothing has changed. Her existence, her absence, it makes no difference to me. So, if she wants to run, let her. If she wants to disappear, good. Because I have nothing left to say to her. She blocked me after that. Good. Saves me the trouble. And now, a month has passed. She's gone, vanished from my world entirely. The quiet? It's nice. Peaceful. But I hear things. From distant relatives, from whispers that still find their way back to me. Apparently, she's cut everyone off. No contact with anyone. Good for her. As for me, life moves forward. My dad and I, we're in a better place than we've ever been. He even got a raise recently. Things are looking up. And for the first time in a long time, I feel free. No regrets. No guilt. Just peace.